Bruchim Avon B'Shem Hashem B'Shem Egen Shir Torah. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Yakov's Shlita on shailos, Shaila halacha, asking a Shaila, practical guide. Today's shir is sponsored by Rabbi Nishmas Imoy Esther Bail Bashashol Chaim Allah Shalom to Nishmas Tzur B'Tzar Chaim to have the great source of sponsoring a shir. Call Egen Shir Torah 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com.
Someone asked me recently, he has a minig quote that when he asks a Shaila, he shops around for a kula. He says, what does that mean? He knows some rabbanim are mekel and halachos kashrus or taras mishpacha, so he goes to the mekel. And he heard that might be questionable. Is it a minig, or is it like they say, minig oisius gehenim? Is that proper? Now I want to be moismada. We're talking about today, when we're asking rabbanim who are mekel, we're talking about rabbanim that are reliable, yirei shemayim, they're not kal, they're mekel. But someone that doesn't deserve to paskin, we're not talking about. We're talking about rabbanim that are respected by their kehila. Can I go to the rav of my choice when I know who's mekel in this respect? So in other words, I'm not looking for a psak, I'm looking for a heter. But I'm getting it from a reliable psak. And this leads us to the second question. Let's say you ask a rav and there's another, your rav is not around, you ask a second rav, and he's machmir. Is it mutter to get a second opinion, to go to a different rav? And again, a respectable rav, and if he says mutter, and if his balabatman follow him, why can't I follow him as well? And this is really the springboard to probably 20 plus questions about the very important but the challenging sugi of asking a shaila. In other words, how the rav paskins, how he bases psak, that's the rav's business. My shaila is me asking a shaila, how do I approach it? So the first question seems to be the Farish Gemara in Erevin Davav Amud Beis, also in Chulin, the end of the Men Gimel Amud Beis. The Gemara discusses the famous machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that machlokes in the most chamadika sugyas. And the Gemara says, halacha Beis Hillel, that was the psak. Haroitza lasses kedivrei Beis Shammai oisa. You want to like Beis Shammai? Fine. Kedivrei Beis Hillel, also good. But you can't mix and match. Mikule Beis Shammai Mikule Beis Hillel. Let's say a person is looking for kulas. So Beis Shammai is very chashuv. Beis Hillel says, I'm going to take the kulas. Rasha. That's a scary word. The Gemara should call someone a rasha. Each one on his own is a chashuv psak. Obviously, you can't shop for kulas. What's important for us is the second halach in the Gemara. Someone is just the opposite. Michumrei Beis Shammai Michumrei Beis Hillel. He's a frumah. And he looks for chumras. He takes the chumras. Allah v'akosavayim with the pasuk in Keheles, haksil b'choyshech hoylech. In other words, this person is groping in darkness. He doesn't have a rav. Who's his rav? Whoever's machma. That's not a rav. And the Gemara accuses him of a terrible crime. He's going in darkness. Now, you're wondering what's wrong with being machmer, number one. And number two, why the accusation of ksil b'choyshech hoylech? So the embassy, you have to realize one thing. The Gemara asked the kasha, Aroitza laske Beis Shammai oisa? It's not true. We pass him like Beis Hillel. So one teretz is before the Baskel said halacha like Beis Hillel. But then the Gemara says he cited to teretz. Aroitza laske Beis Shammai is not talking about Shammai and Hillel. It's talking about any machlokes in Klal Yisrael, including Tavshin Pei Vav. When there's a Beis Shammai and a Beis Hillel, and there's no achra. You could follow your psak as long as you are consistent. You follow your psak who's machmer and some and mekel and some. Haroitza laske Beis Shammai means your psak, even though he might be mekel in some very chamadik isurim. So the Gemara is giving us guidance. A person has to follow his psak. To take all the kulas is a rasha. Take all the chumras is a ksil b'choyshech hoylech. But it still needs a hezbollah. What's wrong with being a machmer on both accounts? So the answer is very pashut. That's a bezoyin of Torah. Torah is the ultimate lichtigkeit. You know, the Tanit B'Yol in the end of Perek Gimel says an incredible thing. Teaching the pasuk, ki ner mitzvah Torah or. A mitzvah is a lichtigkeit. But the or of Torah, me'irim misayfa oilam vat sayfai. Pilaplayim. But Torah is the greatest lichtigkeit. And you think you're groping in darkness? You think you don't know what to do? You have to be machmir? We're not groping in darkness. We have a clarity. We have a psak, Eil v'Eil divrei Elokim chayim. And I'll tell you something more. And that's the issur we have to understand. The Rashba in Tshuva Chelik Aleph Reish Nun Gimel, he spells it out that if someone follows a psak, he could follow him even if this psak is mekel in a chamura shebechamuras of an issur d'oraisa. Why? Because that's the privilege of asay l'charav. In fact, he says more. Even if you follow a written psak, you follow the Rif psakim or the Rambam psakim. That's the much the Rashba gives. The point is, we are not groping in darkness. We have guidance. Now, of course, the person sees, oh, it's always machlaikis, it's always yeshayim. That's the beauty of Torah. That's kipata shefayitz itzelam. But we have a clarity, and that's following a psak. A person that thinks he must take all the chumras is being megala panam Torah like halacha. That's not the Torah. It's not the shenkite of Torah. He quotes the Gemara. The Rashba quotes the Gemara. He quotes two Gemaras. I'll tell you one of them. In Shabbos Kuf Lamed, where we know Mila is Doicha Shabbos, Mila Bizmana. But Machshirei Mila, if someone doesn't have an Ismail, he can't make him Ismail on Shabbos because that's not Doicha Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer held it's mutter. And in Rabbi Eliezer's city, they did that. In Rabbi Eliezer city, they did what the rest of Klal Yisrael considered Chilul Shabbos D'oraisa. But no problem. You follow your psak, he's mekel, you could be mekel. The Chazaynish in Yeridei Sim and Kufnun says the same idea. He brings the same raya, in fact. But he does add, you could follow a psak biksav, even after he passed away. If you follow his psakim, someone that follows the Mishnah Berurah and everything, it has a tremendous guidance. And then I saw Rav Moshe in the Akdama. It's kedai to learn that shtickle. It's a beautiful shtickle. In Akdama to Igros Moshe Archaim Chelik Aleph, Rav Moshe tries to explain why he took the quote audacity to paskin. After all, what do I know? Rav Moshe says, I have no shaychus. He only learned Shulchan Aruch 200 times, never. So he writes, who am I the one to paskin? And you see Gavaldi Ganivas. So he says, but this we find in Chazal, that a person that puts all his koiches into learning, and he says you have to have koivet roish and yiras shamayim and yirei hera, and he comes to a conclusion, that it becomes Torah. And Moshe quotes the Gemara that we mentioned in Shabbos Kuf Lamed, and Moshe says it beferish. Even if klapei shma yegalia, it's also to make machshir mila. So the absolute truth is that you're not allowed to do that. But they followed their Rav, and they did kalocha. In fact, the Gemara says that a little later there was a terrible gzeira from the Goyim on Mila, but on this city they weren't Goyza. So you know why? It was a siman of Shemayim. You did right. You followed your psak. So even if klapei shema yegalia, it's not emes, the halach is it is emes. Because asay l'charav overrides the absolute emes. A person that has a rav has a matana, he has a schus, he has a koyach adir of dvar Hashem zu halacha, and it is emes. So that's why it's pashut. A person that thinks he has to be machma because he's groping in darkness, he's really being mavazah the Torah. He's mavazah the clarkite of Torah. We are not groping in darkness. You ask a Shaila and you feel confident. And maybe that's really why we find something unusual. There's a Mishnah in the Havais that says the same thing just twice in the same parak. In parak Aleph, Mishnah Vav, Asay l'charav, Rav, Uknei l'chachav. The importance of Asay l'charav, no, that's very, very clear. Mishnah Tezayin, a few Mishnayos later, Asay l'charav, Mistalik min asafik. So we know the Mishnahs don't repeat, but mamish the same parak, twice the same halacha, but could be, and this is probably one of the many pshatim, the Asay l'charav, the first one is a person has to have a Rabbi, a guide, the Rabbi, the Rav, Rosh Hashiva, whatever it is, that's basically watching him, keeping tabs with him. It's like a good friend. It's a guide, it's a mashkiach, it's a person that you grow up with. He helps you when you have questions. That's very important. A person is living in a world full of challenges. Asay l'charav, k'nei l'chachav. But then there's another tremendous benefit on a daily basis. And that is a person has sfeikus, he has shailos. He has questions what to do, not only in orach chayim, but in archas chayim. What to do with chinuch habanim, which technology should take into his house, what he should do with his tzedakah money. I mean, there's so many shailos that we need guidance. And sometimes to be machmir could ruin a shalom bayis. I've heard this many times from experts. Sometimes one of the spouses is being too machmir, that's out of the range of the other one, and you leave a tremendous rift. The Yerushalmi in Trumas Perikei Halacha Gimel, Kishem she'os l'tayres atamei, kach os l'tamei asatar. Just like you can't say asa when something is asa, you can't say asa when something is mutter. We know the famous vidir of Nissen Goyim, Eis asher hitarta asarti, Ve'eis asher asarta hitarti. So the question is, you're saying a vidir, so I understand. What you and Baruch said is asa, I said mutter, terrible crime. But what's the crime? Asher tarta asarti? The Torah said it's a crime. The Torah says it's mutter. Why do you think it's asa? Sometimes it comes from Nervin, it's OCD, it's groping in darkness, but that's not Torah, that's not the yoifi of Torah, that's a weakness of a person. I once heard when I was a child, I don't know who said this, but the word safek is the exact gematria of the word Amalek. They're both 240. Safek is Amalek. So a person has sveikas, he starts with small sveikas and ends up with big sveikas, but he's living a life of uncertainty. What it does to his emotional health, to shalom bayis, it's terrible. It turns off children. My father's always worried, he's always nervous what to do. And this is so much not the Ratzon Hashem. Because just like you can't say on asa that's mutter, you can't say on mutter that's asa. And that's why asay l'charav b'stalik min asafik. Just to give a person a simchas achayim, a confidence, a reassuring feeling he knows what he's doing. And this always was the way Yidlach lived. Don't forget, not long ago, people lived in Shtetlach, and it was the norm. There was a Rav, a Mordasra, and naturally, you went to your Rav. He was your psak, he was your guide, he was your mashkiach, he was your best friend. You know, today in a typical street in Brooklyn, there are 2 rabbanim on one block. It could be 2 shuls on one block, or more. So it's a little confusing. But more than confusing, it leaves a tremendous sakana. A person could theoretically live his life without having a Rav. And I knew someone from the yeshiva, and he was a younger man already, and it was obvious he was slipping and sliding and falling all in one. He was mamish having a reader, and I felt my responsibility. I started from an angle. I said, by the way, where do you daven? So he said, when? I said, during the week of Shabbos. Okay, Shabbos, what do you daven Shabbos? So he smiled at him, I have 5 shuls for Shabbos. Oh, really? What's that? Mincha G'dayl he davens, okay. Kabbalah Shabbos and another shul. Shachris, he davens another shul. Probably he davens in the minyan closer to Chatzos than there's Man Krishma. Mincha, Shabbos afternoon. And Ma'ariv, he's probably from the Maran Lotzes. But he had 5 shuls. So I realized that's his problem. I don't have to go further. 5 shuls and no Rav. Now even if he gives the Malka money to all the shuls, but he's missing the security, he's missing the bracha of asay l'charav, and that's why people could slide. People could have problems, and they don't turn to anybody, and no one is even aware of it because no one feels responsibility. Because he comes to me Shabbos afternoon, it comes to me Friday night. I wish I had more time to talk about this, but the point of asay l'charav in our society, every younger man needs a rav, even a woman needs her psak. Chazon Ish in Igeres Gimel Tzadik Beis writes something very powerful. He says, this shita, to make a division in Torah, I asked the Rav my shailos, but in Chachmas Achayim, in personal questions, or in Yoni Gashmias, that's my decision. So he says, this spalt, this division, is the shita hayishana shel of those that throughout the Doiris, an Ashkenaz, Ashedichu es Am Yisrael, Yisur Bagoyim, V'leinish Lefleita. That was the most powerful weapon, the deadly weapon of Reform and Conservative. You do what you want in business, in personal life, Kedusha, all that stuff, that's up to you. The Rav, you ask him about a shayla on a chicken or a Shabbos, but a person has to have a Rav for this as well. And let me say one final point, and then we'll get to the second half of the sugya. But the importance of asking shailos. You know, the Gemara in Yevamos Daf Kuf teaches a pasuk, Ra ye Ra, That's a ra achara, like a compounded double ra. What is ra achara, double ra? So one shot Gemara says he takes gerim, but he doesn't do a good job. He doesn't research it thoroughly. Then the Gemara says another shot. Someone's a dayan. He's on a bezdin, and the Shaila came to him. Tekeya atzubay lidvar halacha bedina. The asi dina lakamei v'gam halacha. He knows what he's doing. Umedame milsa lemilsa, and he tells to this Shaila to the current Shaila. But you know what the ra achara, the double ra is? The islay rabba v'lei ozil mashal. You have a rav in the city. You could have asked him. You could check it out with him. You could run it by him. Ra achara means a person could ask a Shaila and he doesn't. Now this is talking about a dayan, a practicing dayan. He obviously a tamachacham muflik. But if we have the privilege of asay l'charav, we shouldn't squander it. Now I'm not saying you have to ask a Shaila and everything. I mean you have to cherish the rav's time. Don't bother him. But very often in life, we have our bias, we have our nagiyas, and we don't see it clearly. And the only eight are say l'charav. Remember, a Pal once told me, he said, I said, fine. I don't know where he's driving at. He says, Kitzichanach was a psak for Klal Yisrael. He wrote briefly all the halachos. And very often he says, V'yasa sheilos chacham. What kind of psak is that? So Pam said, that's a very wise psak. Sometimes there's no halacha, you can find it in Shulchan Aruch. The only eight is say l'charav. Your situation, your particular case, very often the psak is say l'charav. So you have to use that. So that's why asking a Shaila, a person has a rav, he's not hopping around for coolers, he asks his shailos to this rav, that's haftacha that he gets the lichter guy, the Clark guy. So now let's talk about the second question. And that is it true that once you ask one Rav, you can't get a second opinion? Let's say you think maybe the first Rav was making a mistake. I mean, very often it happens, you have your Rav, but he's very busy, he's an elderly Rav. So you go to the younger Rav, and his psak is asa. You think maybe he wasn't, he's not accurate, maybe he did it too quickly. Can you ask a second opinion? So the Chayre, this is a Beferish Gemara, both in Nida Daf Chafam and Beis, and Chula Mem Dalet. Zok the Gemara, Chacham Shetimei, a Chacham said asa, Ein Chaver Rishoy Litor. Once the Rav said, it's asa, Tamei, you can't say Tor. The first Rav said asa, the Gemara gives two examples, Ein Chaver Rishoy Lahatir. Now, right away we think, this is the Makar, you're not allowed to ask a second Rav. But that's wrong, it's not the Gemara says. The Gemara is saying the issur is on the second Rav. If the first Rav said asa, the second Rav can't say mutta. We don't yet see there's an issur for me and you, the shoyel, to ask a second opinion. In fact, in svara, we could almost say adrabah. Maybe it's a good idea. It makes a healthy pressure on the first Rav. You better think this through, because I'm going to check up. I'm going to ask someone else. It makes a healthy kinas seifrim. So who said this the issur on me to ask a second Rav? You're wondering, so if I can ask a second Rav, so why can the second Rav paskin? So here's what comes out, l'chayra, that I can ask a second Rav, look into the sugya. If you, the second Rav, could convince the first Rav he made a mistake, once he made a mistake, then I follow the right psak. But maybe there is no issur on me or you as shoyelim to ask a second opinion. And the truth is, from the Gemara Nida and Chulin, that would be the correct assumption. But there's a third Gemara, and that's in Daaoreytã Daf Zayin. Hanishal l'chacham v'timei. If me or you asked a Shaila, and the Rav says, asa tamei, lo yishal l'chacham v'tor. Very funny word, v'tor, we'll soon see. But once I ask the first Rav, I can't ask a second Rav. This already is an issur on the shoyel. But look how true our approach is. Toisen Avodah Zarah ask a question. Why can't I ask for a second opinion? All I'm doing is getting clarity. I'm going to make the second Rav look into the sugya. If he could convince the first Rav that Rav made a mistake, I ended up by the truth. And Tois says, what's wrong with asking? Ula yashivuhu midvarav. And Toisus in Nida says, by doing that, we end up with the clarity in Torah. So we're looking for clarity. This often brings out the clarity. But Toysa Nida asked the kasha from a different angle. The Gemara Nida says where Yalsa, Nachman's wife, had a Mara, showed it to Nachman, who said Tameh. Then she asked Rabbi Yitzchak, who said Tar. So Frek the Gemara, how did Rabbi Yitzchak override Rabbi Bachana's psak? But Toysa is another kasha. Frek Toysa on Yalsa. How did Yalsa go to a second Rav? So it's not Meiser Rav, Yalsa did, it's Meiser Rebbetzin. But how did she do it? How did she ask a second Rav? So Toysa is a list of the Clarkite. The only issur is on the Rav, the second Rav, to override the first Rav's psak. But if a shoyl asks a second Rav, Adarabba, the Yates had double oira. Let the first Rav look into it, schwitz, and if you think you're right, prove it. If you think you're wrong, then admit it. So the both Gemaras seem to be saying that there's no issur on the first, on the shoyl to ask a second opinion. But now it doesn't make sense. The Maisa, what are you gaining by asking if the second Rav can override the psak? So here Toysa says, very simple yesod. Me and you, the shoyl, we asked the first Rav, he said awesome, and I think maybe he's wrong. I have a right to, I'm allowed to go to a second Rav and say, Rebbe Laban, I asked this Rav, the Shaila, he said such and such, I think he might make a mistake, I put it in your hands. If the Rav could prove that the first Rav is wrong and you could speak to him, fine. If not, I'm back where I started. The avila on the shoyl, Zakti Taisvis in both places is, you go to the second Rav as if Kaloi Hoya, he says, what's the halacha with this? Mutter. Ah, wonderful. That's an avila. Why? You're being machshil the second Rav in our sugya. But be'etzem, there's no issur asking a second opinion if you do it right. What does it mean doing it right? You tell the second Rav, listen, I don't know anything. The first Rav said also, it doesn't sound right. I'm putting in the second Rav's hands. If the second Rav can prove it, fine. So here we see, and this is all in a Ramah. It's interesting, there is no Rambam, Tor, or Machaba on this sugya at all. The one halach is the Ardeya, the Ramah in Reish Mem Beis Lamed Aleph. He says, he first tells the issur, the second Rav can't override the first Rav's psak. That's the sugya. Then he says, if Lamaisa, the one that asked the Shaila wants to get a second opinion, he could do it, providing he follows Taisvis' requirement of telling the second Rav, I asked the Shaila already, please discuss it with that first Rav. Now, of course, I want to be clear, rabbanim have tremendous qualifications, they have the ability to paskin, and they have a sight to the shmaya. I am not saying we should always question the Rav's psak. This Gemara obviously is talking a case where a person feels that there is a question. Punkt Thursday, someone told me this story, Basher, he says his uncle, I know the person very well, so he told me he heard from his uncle, Valmaisa went to Rav Ozna with a few shailos in Hilchas Mila. And Rav Ozna was having a hard time paskening, so Rav Ozna said, are these shailos negei l'maisa? He says, no, but I'm just wondering. He goes, I noticed, when I have to paskin, I have a siyai tishmai, it flows. Here I was struggling, I knew something is wrong. Please don't ask me these shailos. If it's halach l'maisa, you come back to me, but don't ask me stam. And you look at the tshuvas, how he writes with such a confidence, with such a tremendous bitachon in himself. It's a siyai tishmai. So of course we're not advocating always questioning the Rav's psak, is he right? But we do say the following. We do see Midina Gemara that once a Rav paskin, the second Rav is not allowed to override the psak unless he proves that it was a psak b'tois. As far as the shoyl is concerned, he could ask a second opinion. But he has to do it properly by telling the second Rav, I asked the Shaila, the first Rav, if you could discuss it, I would like to hear the clarity. Now, before we apply this to the probably 20 plus shailos, we have one more point we have to clarify. What's taka wrong? Avada, we learned the Gemara, it's wrong. What's taka wrong with the second Rav saying mutter when the first Rav said asa? He has his own license, he has his own qualifications. What's wrong? So obviously, the simple pshat is, it's a question of kvoid harav, of the first one. The first Rav paskined. What are you doing? You're pasketing, overriding psak, or the shaila is sneaking behind his back and asking a second opinion? Where's your cover HaTorah? You know, the Rav's not a delivery that, return to sender. I'm not interested. He's paskin. And indeed, the Ran in Avodah Daf Zayin, where the sugya is, the Ran says that his feeling why it's awesome for the second Rav to override the first Rav psak, k'voidei shel Rishon, and it's very understandable. However, most Rishonim learn a different shot. And I'll quote the lashon that the Ran quotes the Ravid, but you'll see it's the Ramban, it's many other Rishonim, it's the Ramban, it's the Ritva, it's the Rosh and Avodah. And basically what they say is, when the first Rav paskin that this is also, this chicken is treif, this is Shavia Chaticha D'Isura. The Rav proclaimed this chicken is asa. Now, once chicken is asa, you can't eat it. So, and all the Rishonim use that lashon Shavia Chaticha D'Isura. Now, this sounds very familiar to a famous lashon in Ksubis, Daf Chav Beis, Chav Gimel, where an ish says, Eish Zisani. A Risha walks in the bez and they have no idea who she is. And she says, I'm an Eish Ish. So Mara says, then she can't get married until she proves she has a get. We don't have aid that she's an Eish Ish, but Shavia L'nafsha Chaticha D'Isura. Now here I look carefully, all the Rishonim, the Rashba, the Ramban, again, the Ravid, the Rosh, all say Shavia L'chaticha D'Isura. Who's that going on? They all say it's going on the Rav. The Rav said this chicken is treif, the Rav made the chicken treif. Now I always thought, and I think that makes more sense, that if the shoyel asks the Rav, what's the halacha with this chicken? And the Rav says awesome, so for me it becomes awesome. I asked the Rav. But they all say that's going on the Rav. You know why? Because they're both true. The Rav is qualified to say awesome, not me, I don't know anything. The Rav says awesome. But since I asked the Rav a psak, and I submitted myself to his psak, and he said awesome, so it goes two steps. First the Rav said it's awesome. And then I am a kabbalah his psak. So the Rav can say, oh, buy that chicken, it looks treif to me, don't eat it. I didn't ask him, he can't paskin. But if I ask him, that's the psak. So I think both are true, and I'm happy I found in the Sefer Avodah, that's Rav Shlomo Kluger's Sefer, Masechta Avodah Daf Zayin, he makes this second step as well. So even though they say Shavia Chaticha D'Isura, it's also Shavia Anafshe of the first, of the Shoyel Chaticha D'Isura. So now we have, Bez Hashem, a clarkite. Let us apply this to the many shailos. So let's start with a simple shailah. Someone asks the Rav a shailah, and the Rav says awesome. And he thinks maybe it's mutter, or he hopes it's mutter, whatever, he's dreaming, whatever. So he wants to go to another Rav. You're not supposed to do that? And so it's, the oldest line of defense when you don't like a certain halacha. Today is different. Whatever that means. I don't know why today is different. But his point is, heintige rabbanim, what do they know already? So Lamaisa, I can't say that he's the first to think of that, because Re'ez Apella, the Shari Knesset G'dayla, in Yeridei, Oy Samach Dalad, you can look it up. He quotes from a sefer I don't have, but he quotes from a sefer that says that, he quotes Rabbi Kiva Feigai, that basically he says that since the rabbanim are not as qualified as they used to be, there's no din of chacham shetir. Doesn't apply. Now, however, the Shari Knesset G'dayla proves conclusively that's not true, and he quotes other places and say this negay even zman hazeh. And the base Lechem Yehuda, which is on the page in Yeridei, on our Sif, on our Amar, he taka says that the reason why some are makel is because he says that today he's not a moira, he's more like a ben soira moira. The paisik, I mean, they must have had very interesting psakim. But lamaisa, all the paiskim say that there's no difference today or the times of Tanoim. And the emphasis is that this is really one of the basics of our Amunah. Because let's be honest, we don't have a Reb Kivega, we don't have a Vilna Gaon, we don't have a Moshe Feinstein today. So does that mean that the whole system doesn't work? Chas v'shalom. We forgot a Gemara. The Gemara Rosh Hashanah Daf Chaf Heid, wonders, the pasuk says, Ubasa el ha-shoifet ashiyah b'yam mahem. Frag the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, what's the chiddush? You want me to go to a shoifet, to the Kivega to paskin? So the Gemara, no. The pasuk giving us haftacha. The shoifet, your pasuk of today, is a far cry from a Molaga paiskim. but he has the same shayta d'shmaya. The yiftach b'dayrei kishmul b'dayrei. So believing the previous generations were bigger is correct, but it has a very damaging effect. You know, once someone said, "Amalek said, what's that? Amalek is treif," he said. Amalek rabbanim. You know, someone told me, he said, "I have a hard time relating to Amunus Chacham." I said, "Why?" Because I knew about Belza. Belza was a Malach Alikim, but the Heintige Rabbanim, where did they come close to a previous Rabbanim? And he sounds like he's very idealistic, but it's kfira. He forgot a pasuk. Yiftach b'dayrei kishmul b'dayrei. So just like it's true, we don't have Rabbanim like Amol, but the Rabbanim have the same chen, the same Shayt Shmaya. The way the Chinuch explains, why do you have to follow a pasuk? I feel like Yiminchu Smoil, because he's the one that harved in Torah, and he's the Shayt Shmaya, and he's the conduit for the Beresham psak. So even though you're right, he's a far cry from the previous generations, but he has the same Shayt Shmaya. So that's why, although I did see such a psak, it's not accepted. Now, on whom is the issur? So let's be clear. The real issur is on the chacham shetir when the first Rav was machmer. But if the shoyel goes sneakingly to the second Rav without telling that the first Rav already paskin, he's over lefneiva. He put the second Rav into a matziv of issur. Now the next question, and that is a person was over. He asked the first Rav, said also. And in a moment of weakness, he asked the second Rav, said, Mutter, this is no Shaila. So he didn't have it. Fine, okay, so klap achet. L'maisa b'di'evet, can he rely on the psak that it's Mutter? You know, there's always a chatchila, b'di'evet, and you might even say, once he's mavazi the Rav, so I'll okay, so I'll ask him a chil erev Yom Kippur. Can I at least listen to the psak? The answer is absolutely not. You still have the main reason of Shaveh Chaticha D'Isurah. This is a shtik issur for you. The Rav made it awesome. You can't accept another psak that overrides it, unless, as we'll soon see, the first Rav is moida that he made a mistake. As the Shulchan explained, if the Rav thought it's chaylav, and he said asa, it's really shuman, so there's no chaticha d'isur, it's a tayit. But absent that the Rav's admitting he made a mistake, this is a chefta d'isura. It doesn't make difference if you have 100 rabbanim saying mutter. This became a chefta d'isura for you, the shoyel. And this is mefurish in the Shach, over here on our the Ran says in mefurish, the Rivash, the Shach quotes them as well. Rishonim say this is not just an edelkeit or a midas issue, it's a psak halacha issue. Even with the Eved, the Rav psak becomes halacha l'mais. Now, again, let's say the first Rav wants to retract, because he says, I don't want to argue this. The bigger Rav, he's Meichel and it's covered. Doesn't help. Rav Shemachal Kvayid Kvayid Machal only helps for the reason number one of Kvayid. But for the reason of a psak becomes the hayra of Shavia and Aphsha, for that doesn't help. He only helps if he, like the Baruch HaShulchan and Sif Nuntes, and he says it again in Sif Samach, if he says I made a mistake, I said on Shuman that it's chaylev. That's a psak b'tois. Question, a beautiful shaila. Someone usually asks his Rav, an older Rav, a very experienced Rav, but the Rav was not available. So he asked the younger Rav, and the Rav said Tameh, or Asa. And for some reason he doesn't trust the first Rav. So he wants to go to the second Rav, a greater Rav, to take the Shaila, his Rav. Another beautiful nafkamina. Because if the only reason would be as kvoid Chacham Rishon, I could understand that in such a case, the Chacham Rishon knows that the second Rav has been pasking before I was born. So there wouldn't be a problem. But since the main reason, as the Pais can say, the main reason is Shavia and Aphsha D'Isura, if the first Rav was a Rav, and you submitted his psak, so for you it became a Chafetz D'Isura. It doesn't make a difference what the emes is. It's no different than Eish Zishani that it becomes the emes. And Taka the Ran and the Rivash spell out, Afil hayagadlin imenu b'chachmu v'minyan, you can't ask the second Rav. Now there are Mekilim, I should mention, the Rebbeinu Yerucham, the Marik is Mekel, the Shach, Sivkat and Gimel seems to be Mekel, but for us we have to realize that it's much more bastaver to say that the ikar reason is Shavia and Aphsha D'Isura. Now, if someone has a suffix in, if he's allowed to ask a second Rav, so that would be a Sveik Deban L'Kula, because the Ma'isa is not an issur deraisa, And Taka, Rav Shlomo Kluger, and that avodas avoida, and Chacham Tzvi, and then Gimel says, a suffix, if you're allowed to follow the second Rav, that you're allowed to say suffix lahakal, and you could ask him if you have a legitimate suffix. Now, a Rav Amol will say, I'm not sure. I think you could be machmir, because I'm not sure. Could a person go to another Rav who does have a clarity? So that the Paiskim say, I saw the Chutshani, and he has a Sefer on Hilchos Nid, that's Amud Tzadik Vav. If the first Rav says, I'm saying Aslam Yisafik, it's not a psak. It's a Nigas Veikas. He doesn't have the places to say one with the other. So that's not a psak. It's not Chaticha Disur Misafik. You're allowed to go to a second Rav. If the Rav says, I see no Shaila, that's fine. A Shaila once had the Shaila. He asked the Rav, and he forgot the psak. Forgot the psak. Also, what? He doesn't know. So he said, once I'm asking, can I ask a new Rav? I says, no. Because if it's possible that the first Rav said Asa, so you have a psak of Shav Nafchich D'Isura. That doesn't change because you forgot the psak. So you still have a psak. So find out, Manashach, what he says. If he says Mutter good, if he says Asa, then you have that psak. Question. Somebody asked this to me, and I'm going to repeat his words. I want to ask a Rav, but I'm afraid he'll say Asa. Then I can ask someone else. Can I tell him, I'm asking you, but I'm not going to necessarily follow what you say? I said, that's chutzpah. That's not just lack of chachma. Kavod chachma, that's chutzpah. So the Rav's not dial a heta, chacham u'shiyirtza. So forget about Shavia Nafshe. This is tam chutzpah. But the truth is, again, I'm afraid to say this, but if the shayil has more tact, he says, I'm not going to tell Rav anything. But I'm saying, I'm going to say it, I am not being makabel the Rav's psak. I want to hear what he has to say. So again, if that's, obviously not the same level of chutzpah, but it could be, in this case, we don't have the problem of Shavia Nafshe. Shavia Nafshe is not a bal korcha. A person has the right, an isha has the right to eishes ani, and that becomes real. I could ask a Rav, and I want to hear a psak. But if I say that I really never wanted to ask his psak, could be there's no Shavia Nafshe. But then again, there's still the issur of the Kvod HaRav. What, wasting his time? You're going to use him only as a kula? Was he dial a kula? So avad, it's not the right thing, but I think you don't have to tell him to his face, I'm not listening to you. That's a terrible chutzpah. But just basically, if there's no Shavia Nafshe, at least you don't have that concern. Now, why do I say that? I'll tell you another shayla. Someone comes to a shir, and the Rav speaks about an issue that he has, and the Rav says, it's awesome. Does the shayil, not the shayil, does the sheimeya who heard the psak in the shir, does he have to listen necessarily? I mean, if either why did he come to shir if not listening? But there's no din of Shavia Nafshe in that case, because he didn't ask the Rav what he thinks. He came to hear the shitas. See, there we're going to use this word. There's no Shavia Nafshe, but also there's no chutzpah. The Rav's not talking just to you and your toy. He's wasting his time. I'm going to only listen to you if you say mutter. I won't tell him that, but I'm just going to waste his time. I mean, it's lacking the acheres kadmol HaTorah. Or this today, very common, people send a shaila, or a few shailos, to numerous rabbanim, 20 rabbanim. In fact, they chvoid harav shlita, and you have a list of shailos. Some is even right, with putting together kunches, want to hear different shitas. So that's not looking for a psak. That's halachos ladira. So there's no Shavia Nafshe, and there's no chsaron of kavod. And that's taka pretty common. People send these type of shailos. I mean, maybe you have to be more considerate. Send the Rav 20 shailos, one after the other. But at least it's not, you don't have the svara that if I asked you, I'm going to follow, because I understood that you're not necessarily going to follow. Ma'aseh shehaya, a Rav paskin the shaila, that he had mutter. But he didn't know that the Moroba Asra already said that this thing is awesome. So the shaila is, can you listen to I asked one Rav, he said mutter. The Moroba Asra said awesome, I didn't ask the Moroba Asra. So this, I saw the Beis Yitzchak, Levava Rav, in Chayishimish, but Simon Samachtes has this shaila, and says this is totally the two reasons. Because if the issur is al kvod chacham, then you're stepping on the toes of the Moroba Asra. That's an avla. But if the issur is Shavia Nafshe, I didn't ask the Moroba Asra. So maybe I should have asked him, but it doesn't make it I have to listen to Moroba Asra. So that's what he wants to say. And basically he says that, especially if the shayil didn't know that the Moroba Asra took a stance in this question, then maybe takit's mutter. It's not a chutzpah. But the emes is, as we probably realize today, kamat don't see a mora d'asra. I mean, they have small. You still have there's a gate set, and there's a probably in Antwerp, and in these we have mamash mora d'asra with all the halachos, and maybe other cities. But certainly in Brooklyn there is no mora d'asra. Moshe already says it klachayad in a different context in Yeridei Chelegal Siman Yud Gimel. That today the concept of the mora d'asra doesn't seem to be prevalent, partially because of the Metzias. But it's a beautiful nafkamina in the two reasons. Someone asked me this Friday. He wanted to call his Rav with a Shaila, and he dialed the wrong number. He called another Rav. So you can't hang up on the Rav. The Ravs have, they have the caller ID. Why is he hanging up on me? So he didn't know what to do. So he asked the Rav a Shaila, but he didn't want to hear the psak. No, that I can understand. It's not a chutzpah maybe. What do you do? Hang up on the Rav? No, if he could have been a little more, crafty and thought of a different Shaila. But something like that, it goes with a cheshbin. That's perhaps not a stira. But stam to do things and take the Rav, just push it as abuse, that's what it is, calling you not listening to his opinion, that is severely lacking. A beautiful Shaila. The first Rav said mutter, and for some reason you're not so comfortable with the psak. Can you ask a second Rav? Now here the person is the Hayben Mensch. He's looking for an issur. He doesn't like the psak of heta. So this is a beautiful zil basa taima. Because if the reason you can't ask a second Rav is out covered of the first one, this is sicher wrong. The Rav says mutter, you don't trust him. But if the issur shavia nafshach da'isurah, if the first Rav is matir, no shavia nafshach. And the Darkei Moshe in Siman Reish Mem Hein Yeridei quotes the Binyamin Ze'ev in Siman Gimel. There's a printing error that says it's supposed to be Siman Gimel, who says this very Shaila. The Gemara says he asked the Chacham Shetime or Aser. That means if the first Rav is Meiko, Baby Taka, there is no problem. But then again he says that L'choira, since one of the reasons is Al Kvoid Harav, it should be a problem even if the first Rav was Meiko. And that's the sheet of the Rosh in Avodah Siman Gimel, that Lamais there is a problem as kvoid of the first Rav. However, I saw Tyson of Avodah learns the Gemara literally. The Gemara says the issur is when the first Rav was Machmir, and Toisvis seems to be Mekel if you asked a second opinion, the first Rav was Mekel. The Ramah in Reish Mem Beis Ramah afilu im hita rishain k'fachal harasai ein l'sheni lesser. Once the Rav said muta or asa, Toisvis goes with the shita. The Rav goes to shita that once the Maisa, the Rav Paskin, L'chumrah, or L'kula makes no chilik. In other words, the Ikka, Svara, or at least enough of a Svara, I should say, enough of a Svara to be Machm, to Asa is Kvoid Harav. Now, the Maisa, the Shach quotes Mekilim, the Loika Taisis, the Loika, the Ramah, because Taisis is Mekel. So, the Maisa, this a person really wants, they're definitely what the Mekel, Maisa, it's the Ramah versus the Shach, a Shver Shaila. But I'll tell you an interesting Ma'aseh Shehaya, and here's the story. A Rav, he asked the Rav, and the Rav said mutter. Okay, now, then he tried to ask a second Rav, and the Rav said asa. Then he heard he did something wrong, because he should have stuck with the first Rav. Lamaisa, does he have to listen to the second Rav that says asa? So here, it's pashit. Loimi boy, like the shach, you're allowed to ask a second opinion, and you asked, he said asa, what's the shayah? It's asa. But even like the sheet, you're not allowed to ask a second psak. But once you asked, and he said clearly that it's awesome, you have a serious shavia nafshe at hand. The Rav said awesome, and you listen to the psak. So it makes sense that, Azoy, if I asked the first Rav and he said awesome, and I asked the second Rav said mutter, and even b'di eved, the second Rav's psak is not qualified. Because it's awesome. But fakert, I asked the first Rav said mutter, second Rav said asa, then all agreed that b'di eved it's chal. And who says this? Not me. Listen to the beautiful diak, not my diak. Ege makes his diak in the lashon of Ramah. The Ramah says chacham she'asa ein chaver v'sheila hatir. Once the first said asa, done deal. Then the Ramah discusses our new shayla. The first Rav said mutter, the second Rav said asa. Ein l'sheni lesser. The second shouldn't get involved. Stay out of it. The Rav said mutter, stay out of it. Soktim kiveiga on the page is mashma. Let's say the second Rav did know, whatever he said asa. Fafalin? Yes, fafalin. Because the Maisa, This created a legitimate shailos anfshia, which the second person, which the shailos submitted to, and therefore it bleibt asa. So you have a beautiful dik in the Ramah, all based on the zil basa time. Question: someone asked, came to Beis Medrash or came to a Beis Hara, it's even more common. A few rabbanim sitting together, and he asked one Rav, and the Rav was saying it's asa, and someone shot, what do you mean asa? It's mutter, and they had a big machamta shatayra, and before he walked out, he realized that he didn't get a clear answer. He had mutter, he had asa, but the Rav said asa. So here we come to a few words that we mentioned earlier, but now we have to focus on it. The lashon of the Ramah that I just read is when he asked the second Rav, and the second Rav was answered. So the lashon of the Rav is, the lashon of the Ramah is that since the heta was chal, so the second Rav should not say awesome. So you notice that lashon, that this in order for there should be a din of kva chola hayrasai ein l'sheni lesser. It's lashon of the Ramah. So we see from this, and actually from Tosfos, because Tosfos in Dאorייתא has a Shaila. You ask the Rav, and he said awesome, so it's awesome. But you ask the Rav in Beis Medrash, and the first Rav said awesome, and Taichadir, but the second Rav inject. What do you mean? It's mutter and the whole mafachloikis. So Tosfos says in that case there's no din of shוויה nafshei. Why? Or no din of chacham shahayra, in fact. Why? Because before the psak was chal, it was challenged. So we see an important precondition in chacham shahayra. The Rav said awesome, and you said thank you, and you walked out of Bezdin, so it's a psak. But in Bezdin, or in Beis Medrash, or before you makabel it wasn't chal. So if it's not chal, it's not chal. And this fits beautifully with the issur of shוויה nafshei. Shוויה nafshei is my conscious decision to accept the psak. But if the psak was questionable meikara, if it was questionable from the time it was said, even though he said the words os, it's not a din in dibur, it's a din in bimakabel. And that's why lemaisa the Ramah's lashon hit the harishon v'kvacholo hayrasoi ein l'sheni lesser. Now I'm telling you something that lemaisa you have to realize that this Ramah is talking about the abnormal case when the first Rav was matir. Then you need a halachos issur. But zok teshach and sivkot nun beis and sivkot nun hey, hu adin fakert. If the first Rav said asa, but before the psak was chal, he got a machamta shatayra, it's the same halacha. It has to be chal. So another beautiful nafkamina, because if it's din about chacham al kvoira chacham, what's the chilik? The only question is, how do you define the word chal hayra? I asked the Shaila, and the Rav said asa. Someone said, "Oh, mutter. When is it chal?" So the Taz in Sifkat Yud Zayin, all in this Ramah, chal hayra means that you started eating the food that the second Rav said asa, the first Rav said mutter, or you mixed it into other food. You actually put it in practical halacha l'maisa. Frek the Taz, the Shach and the Kudas HaKesef on this Taz, I don't understand. The lashon, the chola hayra, we learned from the case of, in the Beis Medrash, and there you walked out whether it's chal or not. You don't need a maisa. So now we're a little confused. What is the word chal? Do you need a maisa of eating, or is it enough just makabel? So what makes sense is mar machad loy pligi. The Taz is talking in a case that the first Rav was mekel, second Rav was machmer. That's already, some hold as mutlach hatchila. You want to be more chayshish, but there has to be a halachos of actually accepting the psak. But fakert, when there's an issur psak, oh, that's shוויה nafshei. You can't take chances. Shוויה nafshei means you have to keep the psak, even if you didn't yet put it into practice. If you accepted it as a psak is a psak. Shוויה nafshei Chaticha dאיסורא. But one thing I do feel more comfortable in saying, that we see that there has to be a acceptance. That's why if you write a Rav Shaila, all the things we said earlier, when you go to a shir and you hear it, you didn't come in with a das to shוויה nafshei. So shוויה nafshei is the yisoid. There has to be a kabbalah's psak. Pashtus, even if you don't actually put it lamaisa and start eating it or throwing out, whatever it is, but just the fact that you makabel it, that should be enough. I saw a marsham in Chelik Dalet Simon Tzadik Dalet who says that if a brav paskin asa, taka asa. But after the Rav died, Achamoi said there's no problem of Chacham Shatir. Now to me it was a pliya, because maybe there's no problem of Kvayit HaRav if the Rav passed away. But if it's a Vora Shavia Nafshe, I mean the Rambam's psak is as live today as it is when the Rambam said it. So why is there no Shavia Nafshe? So he says, I saw it in Avodas Havodah, there's a sefer of Shlomo Kluger. So I looked it up, and Baruch Hashem, he wrote, the Masham writes, I think I saw this years ago, I haven't seen it since, this is what I think he writes. But he writes something totally different, and I'm very happy, because it's hard to believe that anybody would say if the Rav died, is Ois Shavia Nafshe? But listen to a Go'ainis, Shlomo Kluger's Go'ainis. He has a Shaila, he has a whole 2 pages about Nafkamina, the 2 reasons. But this is a beautiful Shaila. Someone had a Shaila, a shver Shaila, and this is not today, you call up a Rav in a second, you connect to the other side of the world. He sent a shliach on a long journey, asked the Rav a Shaila. Okay. It took time, and never he heard before the shliach came back that the Rav passed away. Now, nothing to do with the Shaila, the Rav died. So the shliach finally came to his house, stop, don't tell me the psak. Maybe I'm not going to makabel it. So Zokti Shlomo Kluger, oh, this is pretty good. Why? He says, because Lamaisa, the reason of Kvoid HaChacham doesn't apply, because the psak died. The only issur Shavia Nafshe, if he wasn't yet makabel it, so he doesn't want to makabel it. The Kvoid HaChacham is now applicable. He doesn't say, Chamoisi, there's no problem. He just says one thing, that if there was no Chala Hirasai and there's no Chsar and Kvoid HaRav, then it's mutter. But to say when the Rav passed away, the psak is over, that Shlomo Kluger did not say. So that's a big tzarachim, but the Marsham, the Ragli Chasid of Yishmar, the Marsham Meishur, the Marsham writes, I haven't seen it, this is what I think he says. Tell you another beautiful Shaila, I taka saw in Taka Shlomo Kluger. He says that the first Rav said mutter. Then he asked, what's your second Rav? Or fakert. So he says the following. Let's say the Rav told me awesome. Okay? So we know Allah Janal, there's a second Rav. But I want to hear what other rabbanim say, but I'm not going to change the psak. I'm going to keep the issur. But I want to hear what other rabbanim say. Can I ask this another psak look into it? And do you want to hear what he has to say? So he says that this is totally a nafkamina. Because if the only reason is out kvoid harav, here, you're violating that. Why second guessing the Rav? The Rav said mutter. Also, what's the problem? There's still an issur. But if the issur is al shavia nafshe, and you're not going to change the psak, what's wrong? And he has a beautiful diak in the Gemara. The shoyel asked the first Rav, don't ask a second Rav v'yitar. Yitar. The dictic is not correct. It should say the second Rav will be metayirid. What does v'yitar mean? He says the Gemara is alluding to this yesod. If I'm asking a second Rav, but I'm not going to take his heta, so I'm not going to violate Shavia Nafshe, maybe that's mutter. And maybe the Gemara is inferring that the main reason is Shavia Nafshe. So if I say it as a condition, I'm not going to accept the second psak, Ken Zayin, that will be mutter, ayin sham, yet other nafkaminas. The most challenging of all is, what does it mean a chacham that made a mistake? You can't ask a second opinion unless the second Rav could convince the first Rav to retract, because it's a psak toyis. What does it mean a psak toyis? Today we have so many pais with different psakim. Who's wrong? Who could say something is wrong? So the Ramah Lashon is chacham she'asa ein chaver rishai lahatir mishikal adas av miyashlei kabbalah sheta oy sheta b'dvar mishnah. If the first one was toyi b'dvar mishnah, yachol lahatir, the second one could override the psak. Now that's a pretty serious mistake if the Rav forgot a mishnah. Zokti Ramah in Chayshemish b'simin chafhei, also regarding psakim of dayin sheta, that it's a psak until you know that he's toya b'dvar mishnah, oy b'talmud, oy b'divrei ha-poiskim. Divrei toya b'dvar mishnah is just a mashal of an absolute mistake, but it's lav dafka. If someone forgot halacha in Shulchan Aruch, it's also a toya b'dvar halacha. Now, but typically, or more often than not, it's not he forgot halacha. He went with the Ramah, but the Magen Avraham and the Taz argue. or Ramosha, or the Chashulchan, or Mishtabura. So generally, it's hard to say that somebody was toya unless it's an objective toyas. You have to realize that the Ramah says that, let's say the first Rav says, you know what, you're Shikal Adas, I hear what you're saying, I'll accept you that I made a mistake. So, Zok the Ramah, he could change his psak. And the Shach seems to agree with Ramah. But the Piva Eger, some Seifa, Louis Yisrael says, but the Shach himself in Chayshe Mishpat says you can't do that. The Shach hold, unless it's a mistake, you first Rav, you can't change your mind. It's not your covet at stake. If it's not a mistake, the first Rav Sak is valid. But that just shows you what it means that the oimik of this halacha. The halacha has to be, you have to have a real toys. Otherwise, it's not you. It's not your covet. It's a Dvar Hashem. A Rav Sak is a Dvar Hashem. And one final question. Someone asked me today, Baruch Hashem, there's so many svarim out there. Can I just look up a sefer and paskin what I see? So obviously, you can't look up a sefer until you find a heter. That's mamish Rasha. Or stam taking svarim, randomly, maybe it's ksil hailach. But if someone follows a certain paisik, we saw this said that, the Rashba said that already. But one thing I would caution: make sure you know how to ask a shaila. Rapam once told us a story. I'll never forget. We call him Yankel. Yankel was davened by a certain Rav, and Yankel was an Amoritz with all the Hidurim. He didn't know anything. And he asked the Rav 3 times a day, shailos. Once 2 weeks go by, and the Rav didn't even see Yankel. He thought maybe he's not well. And he meets Yankel. Yankel, you okay? He goes, wonderful, Rav. He goes, I didn't see you a long time. He goes, Rav, you wouldn't believe it, I became a paisik. Rav said, I don't believe it. He says, what happened? I became paisik. You had a shaila? Yeah. Are you paskin? Yeah. Oh, what was the shaila? He says, I'll tell you the truth. It was Erev Shabbos, and the goiter took a container of milk and poured it into the cholent and mixed it up. So he said, yeah. So what you paskin? I said, I paskin, it's mutter. So Rav says, Yankel, mutter bas m'chav d'oraisa. The Rebbe, I told you, the goiter made a mistake. Toyis akum muteres. So if you know how to look at it and see that the toyis akum muteres, you can paskin on your own. I can talk to you all. I was asked to mention, please vote tomorrow. It's crucially important for the tzibur, for Chai, so please, for Tuesday, Zriz Magdima tomorrow. Okay. Please vote, the Kissa.
Shem Egen Shir Telak Rabbi Shkirta, Smith for today's shir. Like Rabbi Shkirta, the sponsor for today's shir, Rabbi Shbrot, Lil Nishmas Imo, Bela Basar for Esther Bela Basar for Chaim. La Shalom and Nishmas Chur B'Tzara Chaim. Tav the great sponsor of shir. Call Egen Shir Telak at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Chananya ben Akasha Emrat Gerish Baruch Lezakes es Yisrael. Fig Heaven and Torah Mitzvah Shenem Al Neu Chofetz Aman Sitkoi Yagdol Torah V'Yader.
Hey!
Okay, everybody, so I want to get a second opinion on the shir, the Sikkim.
Good. Okay, just briefly, we learned today, first of all, we can't overstate the importance of Hasei l'charav, both in Mili the Shmaya, Mili the Ara, both are important. And a person has to have a paisik and has to be consistent. To take all the kulas, the Gemara says, is Rasha. Even all the chumras is wrong, not as bad, but it's a ksil, b'choyshech hoylech. We are not groping in darkness, even though there are numerous machlekes even in the most serious sugis, but we have a clarity. It's called Hasei l'charav. Ra'ach hara, the Gemara says that we don't ask shailos. But basically, once a person asks a shaila, there's an issur on the second Rav to paskin against the first Rav, which puts the shoyel in a situation that you can't ask for a second opinion unless he tells the second Rav, I asked the shaila, the Rav said asa, I'm putting it in your hands. If you could prove that the first one made a mistake, I would appreciate it, but otherwise I'm keeping it. So really the ikka is on the second Rav to knowingly override the first Rav's psak, but there's also sort of an avla on asking a second Rav unless you tell the second Rav this is a second opinion. If it's a objective tois, so then as the Shulchan says, it's not a psak, there's no problem. But basically there are two main reasons for this issur of chacham shahayra, either als covered of the first chacham or shavia anfshia or Khaticha Da'Isurah. And it's even a geya today because the rabbanim have the same credentials, and that is siyata d'shmaya, diftech b'dorah kishmul b'dorah. So we don't need the amolog gedolim, we need the siyata d'shmaya, and the Baruch Shalom is the zelber rabbanim shalom. So it's the siyata d'shmaya is the same. B'diavad, even if you ask b'diavad and the Rav said mutter, you can't accept that psak unless, as we said, if the first Rav said mutter and the second Rav said asav, then b'diavad you have to follow the issur. But basically, even if the second Rav is bigger than the first Rav, you should not ask the second Rav because again the first Rav had a siyata d'shmaya. If the Rav said misafek you should be machmir, you could get an opinion who will know definitely because that's not a psak, that's an hanhaga. The Rav paskind the shoyel forgot his psak, go back to the Rav. If there was to say I'm only listening to you if it's mutter, that's a chutzpah and it shouldn't be done. What you hear by a shir where the Rav said a shir is not talking to you, there's no shavia nafshe, send a letter to many rabbanim, but contradicting a murder asra perhaps would be an avla, but it's still not the issur, but today that's probably using Evan Negeya. But lamaisa, when if a person asks a shaila, I forgot to mention, and left out some details and he has to go back, then he could go back to a different Rav, because this came out like a new shaila. B'diavad, a person that had a psak of mutter and ask someone else should keep the issur, but in any case the issur has to be chal, as we said, pashtu mekabelit al dasta mekabelit the shavia nafshe, and as we said, a toyis has to be a real toyis, not just a shikal adas, and as we said, the main thing is a person can look up something if he knows how to look it up and get the successful answer. Yes. Yeah.